8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Project Egg Show, your daily dose of entrepreneurship, inspiration, and education. Today, we have the honor of speaking with Sarah Olivieri. With over 13 years of experience working on the web and over 16 years of experience working in and leading nonprofit organizations. She founded the Open Center for Autism in 2005, served as the deputy director of the Global and Regional Asperger Syndrome Partnership, and executive director of the Helping Children of War Foundation. In addition, Sarah is a co-author of a very significant piece, Lesson Planning a la Carte, Integrated Planning for Students with Special Needs. And she's also had her own for-profit business since 2005. Sarah, you're killing it. You're doing so many amazing things, and there are so many other things that I couldn't even mention in this brief introduction. So without any further ado, welcome to the show. It is such an honor to be speaking with you today.
Thank you, Ben. I am really happy to be here, and what an undertaking doing a daily podcast. So congratulations to you.
Well, thank you very much. And, you know, it makes it a lot easier to have awesome people like you to talk to. So thank you so much for coming on the show, and thank you for taking the time to do this and carving out the time in your busy schedule. I really appreciate it.
Of course.
All right, so let's jump right in. What is your story?
Oh, man. So I started out really in nonprofits. I had been interested originally in college. I studied international studies. I traveled abroad a lot. I went abroad to Japan and taught English. And when I came back, I fell into a job organizing a conference for a nonprofit, quickly became the program director for the same nonprofit, and realized that I loved that work. Over time, you know, things happened. I got better. I progressed. And over that period of time, I picked up a side skill of building websites, which turned into digital marketing. And when the economy collapsed, I really leaned on the digital marketing for my main income. But it took me a long time before I was ready to say that I was an entrepreneur and that, like, this is what I did, really. Even though I was helping my husband at the time run a video production company, which he had started, but I had realized, like, I'll help you get started, but I'm not going to run it for you. But I ended up running it. And then he started, but I ended up running a cafe and art supply store. So I got deeper into business. I learned about inventory and all these things. But all the while I was doing more and more, building up a client base. And one day I had the opportunity to take on a very large project that was beyond my technical capabilities, but that I understood conceptually. And it was for a nonprofit. And it was in that moment that I said, I am ready to shift to an agency model because I would need to work with other contractors and really do that for this project. Around that time, I ended up leaving my husband, and I ended up in what, you know, partially was a hard situation. I was leaving. We had no money. We just had debt. I had a son who was 3 at the time. But the other half of that story is I gained what I think every entrepreneur needs for success, which is I gained hyper clarity and focus on what I needed to achieve, because I knew, like, I had a dollar amount of how much I needed to make in order to get back on my feet and to support my son financially. His dad and I were sharing physical custody, but I needed to, you know, bear the financial burden of that. I had knew where it was going, but what I knew about myself was I needed to help people. Like, that's how I'm driven. I come from a nonprofit background. Like, if I'm not doing something fulfilling, I'm just not going to do it that well. So it had to be fulfilling. And the third thing that happened that was kind of a stroke of luck, I had joined like a mastermind group to learn how to run a web agency better. And they had us do this exercise where we really learned how important it is to hire other people to do various parts of your business that you are not the best at, so you can maximize your own value to your business and scale enough to make the kind of income you wanted. Now, it was like within the same day, I had had a meeting with the divorce mediator, and she had sent me home with this homework of filling out the schedule of how much time I was going to have with my son and how much my ex would have with our son. And I reversed the math for myself. And I said, if I want to spend all this time, the only time that I have with my son, which is now basically half of what I used to have, how much time do I have left to work? And that came out to like 28 and a half hours. And so I didn't have that entrepreneur moment where like, I'm just going to hustle and work harder and work more hours and like somehow make it. I was like, wow, I have to take home at the end of the day for my business at least $120,000. I have to do it in this way that's about helping nonprofits. That's what I know. That's what I love. And I have only 28 and a half hours a week to do it in. So I got so focused. And then I started just to move forward at that point. And eventually, I first took a journey doing marketing for nonprofits, but eventually that led to building a business framework for nonprofits to run off of, which is mainly what we do today. It's called the Impact Method. And I train people how to do the Impact Method and help them implement it in their organizations. So that's my story.
Wow, first of all. Second of all, there are so many doors here that I want to open. You talked about traveling and getting clarity, and then the nonprofit work, and at the same time, you know, you want to spend time with your your kid, and there's so many things here, and I really want to break them down one by one. So let's start with the traveling. What was that like for you? What was that experience like for you traveling at such a young age?
So I think one thing that I recommend traveling, and not just traveling, I was living abroad. So I was doing like study abroads for months at a time. I went to Spain for a summer. I went to Africa, East Africa for 3.5 months, or semester basically. And I went to Cuba for another semester. And one thing that, yes, you learn about how the world works, but personally, when you do that, you learn what parts of yourself are like you at the core and don't change no matter where you go or what you're doing. And you learn about the other parts of yourself that when you're in a different culture, just fly out the window. Like when I was in Africa, I learned toilet paper, just not relevant. It's not available. Forget about it. Be fine. But I wouldn't have known that about myself if I wasn't put in a place where I had to experience that. So that's one thing about travel. And I think it's so grounding for knowing who we are when we expose ourselves to other cultures. That being said, too, the opposite lesson right there is learning how to be flexible and how to adapt to a new culture. And maybe I can share like a brief lesson that I learned from each of the places I went. In Africa, I learned this lesson of like everything has its own time. There was kind of this stereotype going there that everything's slow in Africa. And Africa, like I kind of cringe saying that Africa is a huge continent. It varies from place to place. I was in Tanzania, and I learned that some things were very slow and some things were very fast. To me, it was hard to predict what, but after I was there for a while, I started to pick up like an intuitive sense of, is it okay to be 3 hours late? Because sometimes it is there. Or if I'm like 5 minutes late, am I going to be in trouble? Different situations have their own time there, and learning to be okay with that for that is a skill that I think I've taken with me as a consultant, as an entrepreneur, as a mother, just looking at each situation and saying, does this have its own pacing? Does it have its own natural timing? And if I work with that, I will be more successful than if I work against it. So that's what I learned from Africa. Cuba, was a very interesting experience because in Africa, I saw extreme poverty. And in Cuba, I saw a different type. This is a poor country that's doing things in very different ways. So I got to understand a lot more of that. I got to see a country that follows what we do in the United States so closely. I mean, they follow our state elections, not just our presidential elections. They know as soon as new music comes out, they were so, and this was before like the embargo was lifted as it is now. And yet I was so amazed, like, how could we know so little of what goes on in the day-to-day goings on in Cuba? And yet they are following us so closely. And I also got to see a culture that was much more profoundly affected by, they had a much stronger feminist movement. So it's a Latin culture. There's plenty of machoism. And yet I remember meeting a couple at their house, and the guy's all like, yeah, I'm kind of Latin-y, macho-y, like, we'll go, just let me finish cleaning the kitchen first. It was this great mix. I'm sure I learned more profound lessons in Cuba, but they're not coming to me right now. And then Japan, I was there for over a year, so I really got a little bit deeper into their culture. And they have thinking about what's inside space and what's outside space, not physically, but what is like public and what is private. And it's different than what we have here. So like trains are kind of like private space. You can just be yourself on a train, even though it's a very public space. So it was really interesting to me to kind of learn different ways of thinking about, what the contexts are and how we behave, whether or not we behave as our professional selves or kind of our private laid back selves. Different thinking about employees, like a leader of a company or a manager, really caring very holistically for employees. That was really interesting to learn about. And then just being very open in Japan as a foreigner, like we have a lot of, and I learned this when I worked in the autism field as well, we have a lot of implied social rules that nobody will tell you blatantly what they are, but you're supposed to learn them and follow them. And in Japan, they have really, I'd say, more complex social rules. There are a lot of them, a lot of scenarios, but they're explicit about them. So as a foreigner, they want to make sure I learn them too. And so you'd go to somebody's house and you'd be like, we're going to do this, this, and this. You should behave this way here and that way there. Ta-da! It's clear. And I've taken that into, I think, as a leader, I learned how amazing it is if someone is just really explicit with you about what they expect from you. And so that having that experience culturally has made it easier for me to be explicit with people who need information from me and who I'm relying on to help me out.
Wow. So that just opened up a whole nother realm of doors here, which I'm so excited about. So I loved what you were talking about. When you were saying when you traveled, it was interesting how you got more in touch with who you are at your core. And a lot of the things that maybe you thought were important just kind of faded away, but you recognized what actually stayed with you. So my question to you there is, and I do want to dive into the three countries, but my question is, what parts stayed?
Oh, they're kind of varied. One is the way I feel inside when I smile. Like, I don't know if I could ever put great words to that, but I know how a smile feels to me. It is wholly my own. It's controlled by my own body. And there is nothing in the world, no situation I could be in that in any way ever changes what that feels like to me. That's a little piece of home for me. I smile a lot, but I've been told. But that's one thing. What's something else? I think just there are only a few things that make me uniquely me. And I mean that in the most so when life gets complex, I know that most of those
Sarah,
things are certain.
You kind of cut out for a little bit. You said
Sure.
You were talking about how there are a few things that are uniquely you.
Sure. There are a few things that are uniquely me. It's not that many. And I mean that in a positive way, because I know when the world gets complex, the most of the things that are going on for me and for other people around me are contextual. They have to do with that situation. They're not really like me at my core, and they're not changing me or ruining me. It's just a small handful of things, important things that make any one of us uniquely us. And you don't need that many things to be a whole person in that way.
What were some of those things?
So,
You mentioned
yeah,
the
I think
smile, but
for me, I always have the ability to kind of break down a situation, like, and just kind of look at it. I know that me as a person, I can easily separate my emotional reaction from the kind of the facts of what's going on in a situation. I know that about myself. I know that's one of my strengths, and I play to it. You know, I put myself in situations. I used to say, there's a woman, Sally Hogshead. She has the, what's it? It's the Fascinate profile. Are you familiar with this? She has kind of like an assessment you can do of yourself, which is, it's not what your personality is. It's about what part of your personality fascinates other people. And she has an exercise where she's got some archetypes, and you can be one of them. And I am I'm going to forget what I am. Basically, it's like power and trust. It's always two things. And she encourages you to kind of create a statement about yourself that kind of encompasses the way you embody these things. And so I had created one, and I said, I thrive when creating certainty in dynamic environments. So for me, like, the more things get crazy, the more, like, my brain, the way I am in every situation is just, I can just slow right down. I can pull myself out of the equation. I can think through it. No matter, like, it's not that I ignore my fears or my emotions. It's just that I can separate them, and I can deal with them separately from how I deal with the issue at hand. So that's something I know about myself, and it's a strength that I use every day.
Yeah, that's like a superpower.
It is like a superpower. I have an amazing sense of smell. That goes with me everywhere I go. It's a superpower. I know to avoid certain situations. That, it's not necessarily bad smells, certain chemical smells I can't deal with. It definitely influences. I don't know that one's especially useful, except in cooking. I do like cooking, and I like to play a game like where I taste food and I guess what's in it. So I'm very good at that game. I should use that one more. But there's no, like, the things I know about myself are there's no theme among them. They're kind of like random bits that are the essence of me, and I can feel it and feel comfortable wherever I am, knowing that about myself.
That's huge, though, because so many people that I talk to, they don't really have a fundamental understanding of themselves. And if you don't know who you are, you don't know your strengths and weaknesses, then how can you put yourself in a position to be the most successful? Like, unless you get really lucky and, like, you just happen to either get put in or find yourself in a situation where, like, you're just tapping into all of your talents. Like, you have so much more potential left to explore. So I think that's huge that you not only recognized what those skills are, but that you use them. And it's so interesting to me that it really became more apparent to you when you were traveling.
Yeah. And I mean, anybody who feels like they don't know who they are, travel, but you got to live someplace and then live another place, and take note as you live one place. How do you feel? Like, what's going on for you? Like, who are you in this situation? And then go someplace else and say, who am I in this situation? And you say, where is it the same in both types of places? And you will find yourself. We're all there. Not complicated. What's at our core? I really believe, I mean, I have a pretty positive outlook, but I really believe that at everybody's core is something kind of wonderful I feel like simple's not quite the right word, but if you think about, like, design principles, like the essentialism, like there
the fundamentals.
Right. It's essentialism is about that, that simple element that's so profound. We have those elements that make us up at our core. So you can find yourself, and you're not that complicated.
That is so powerful and so impactful. I was thinking about this the other day, and I actually talk about this. I talk about this with a lot of people, but specifically one of the people who I love talking about this with is my uncle. And he's an author. He's given a TEDx talk. Well, when I think he was like 27 or 28. He literally sold all of his possessions, went out into the woods, and he built a cabin. And I think he was there for like 8 to 12 months, something like that. Uncle Eric, if you're listening to this, please forgive me for not getting all the details right. I love you. But he sat there and he meditated and he was very introspective, and he figured out so many things about himself. So I love talking with him about that. And one of the concepts that we discuss a lot is the idea of layers. And not like I guess a little bit like in Shrek, the movie, like ogres are like layers, or onions, because they have layers. But anyways, but layers, right? Because you have who you are at your core. But then there are a lot of external influences or like situational influences or contextual influences that I feel like a lot of us internalize. And so there are these like competing forces and of like who you are versus all of these extra things that you've brought into who you are. And then it's kind of confusing because you don't know what's really me or what are these external influences. And then they're like meshing in the middle. So you're like, there's so much confusion. But to be able to travel and, like you said, go to different places, get those different perspectives and see what's left over after all of that. What are those common threads or that common thread? That is so powerful. I feel like that would help so many people if they did that.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think there are a number of people who've gone out in the woods. That's another way to do it. And, I realize I've said this a few times about myself, but it is this one thing I learned traveling is that I am so optimistic. I always think I have it made. Even when I was in Africa with malaria for like the third time, I was like, I'm so lucky. Not because I had malaria, but that kind of drove it home for me, where other people were like, oh man, I got the bad homestay, or I got the bad trip, or the bad bed. I know that about myself. I almost always think like I'm in a great place. Just like, I shared my divorce story earlier, and I'm like, I got so lucky while I was getting divorced. I know that about myself. And it's both a positive and a negative. Like, it's a positive when I work through challenging situations because I feel my optimism drives me forward to a positive result. I also have to be careful, like, that I'm not fooling myself into being more optimistic than I should be in a situation, and that I don't keep driving it forward when it's doomed to failure.
That is such an important thing, because I am very optimistic too. Like, it is, I almost surprise myself how like optimistic I am and just so happy and so grateful for everything. Like, and I have a lot to be grateful for. Let me just stop and say that. But yeah, like I think about that a lot. Like, you can be so optimistic that you almost lose sight of the reality of the situation in some sorts.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've also noticed is that with people who aren't as optimistic, it can be very frustrating for them because they might be having a bad day or they just want to vent something. And they're like, oh yeah, this happened and this. And I'm like, yeah, but on the bright side, and then, have like 3 or 4 things are like, oh yeah, there's, that's not that bad of a situation, or there's such an opportunity, or, and it's kind of frustrating. How do you deal with that? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I partner myself with people who are less optimistic. I know that that's how I am. It's not changing. I learned that's at my core. So, and if you're an entrepreneur, like if you're the optimistic type, and we talk a lot at PivotGround, both in running the business and in the work we do with nonprofit leaders, is no one person can be everything. And to really lead an organization or a business, there are kind of two functions that are required. For a while, I followed the entrepreneurial operating system, and they talk about the visionary and the integrator. That visionary is often a very optimistic person who's like thinking about the future, and the integrator is the person who's like really thinking about the details about how to make it happen. We started to talk about this same relationship in a kind of the long game person versus the short game person. I'm very much the long game. I'm all about the long game. And that's part of like, it's like chicken and the egg. Like I'm positive because I see that even though it's hard now, the long game works out in the end. And that just keeps me going. So I have partnered. I work with a woman named Sonia. She never really likes to show her face, but she is there. She is monitoring the short-term game. She's not a negative person. I don't want it to sound like that, but she brings up, we should be concerned about this. We should be concerned about that. And I know my positivity, and I try to be very self-aware of when it's the time for me to be super positive and be like, we're going to get through this time. And when it's the time for me to really hear her and say, okay, let's address this so we don't, so it's not a concern. How do we fix this? So yeah, you can't be everything. So find yourself people. It could be one person, it could be multiple people, it could be a mentor, somebody, find a balance. If you're running a business, it can't be just you. All those solopreneurs out there, find somebody else, make a business out of it. You deserve it and you need it. And, find people who complement you, and you can that's to me like the beauty of business. You can make this something that is bigger than yourself and is better than yourself because it's got more facets, because you can have more than one person putting into it. It's pretty exciting, I think.
That is tremendously exciting. And I absolutely know what you're talking about. Like, I'm very, very grateful for my team with Project Egg. And one of the biggest contributors, I want to be very respectful and not, not call her out, put the spotlight on her if she don't want it. But she's kind of like the executive manager. Mm-hmm. And she basically runs the show in all the back office stuff and in the background, and like make sure that things get done. Like our goal, our mission is to put out a new episode every morning. And this is the podcast. The live show is a little bit different. We have a lot more flexibility, but with the formal podcast, every morning at 8 a.m. Central Standard Time. And like, that is a quite an undertaking. Like, yeah. You have to like have the content. You have to film it. You have to, first of all, you have to find the person. You have to see if it's a good fit. You have to film the episode. You have to create the graphics and get it published and get all the show notes. So it's like, there's a lot that has to be done. And I'm just so grateful because I can focus on what I love, which is, interacting with extraordinary people like you and creating the content and creating the vision. And it is such a relief to know that you have people on your team who are helping you get to where you want to go.
Yeah. It's so true. And, I don't know, a couple entrepreneurs have shared this with me, and I'll just share it in case anyone in your audience hasn't heard this kind of thing before. But as that kind of forward thinking, I bring inspiration. I bring, new products and things to PivotGround and great ideas, and I'm great with clients. I'm not so great at making sure I've followed up with everybody. Put it on my calendar and I will do it. I don't need to be micromanaged, but some of those smaller things are hard for me and I will resist them. And I have a team. I have Sonia, who I've called out, and probably like your person, she doesn't love being called out, but I love her, and I want the world to know that there is another person who helps me get everything done. And I have an assistant too. And my assistant is in my email, helping me answer emails. I do not read all of my own emails. I do not answer all of my own emails. I do some of my own scheduling. I do not do all of my own scheduling. I do some of my own posting on social media, but my assistant, who I trust completely, is in my personal Facebook account, helping me make it happen. Do I generate the words? I generate the ideas, but I can't execute every little piece. Nobody can. And if you see some superstar guru out there like being like, they do it all and it's all so easy and they're only spending 4 hours a week or whatever it is running their business, it's because someone else is helping them do the work so that they don't have to. It's true for me. I don't work on Fridays. Which is great. It keeps, that's what I need to recharge my mind. And as soon as we got to the point where I stopped working on Fridays, it paid off in dividends because my thinking got better. And I might not be working on Fridays, but while my brain is resting, it's making stuff that we can then use to make the world a better place, to make our business more profitable. So it pays off. So people like me, we need our thinking space. We need that time. And if we try to power through and do every little detail, we lose what's most valuable about ourselves. And those other people, they love to work with us as long as we don't micromanage. I've always been a delegator, so I don't really have great advice on like how to stop micromanaging, but there are plenty of entrepreneurs who've learned this lesson the hard way. And if you're a micromanager, seek those entrepreneurs out, learn how they did it, because you are thwarting the growth of this beautiful business that's going to be more than you by doing that.
One of the lessons, I guess, that was passed down to me from one of the guests on the show was when you're first starting out, you may have to do everything in the very beginning. Very beginning, if you don't have the capital to put into it, so on and so forth. But all the things you have to do, write them down. And if you want sticky notes or like a Google Doc or whatever, just write them down, write down every little thing, and then see, okay, what are the important things here? What can only I do? What can I outsource? What doesn't need to be done, right? Because I will say, when I first started my very first business in December 19 of 2014, or on December 19 of 2014, I did a lot of things that just weren't important. They were not. I probably remade my cover photo on my Facebook page like 7 times. And it's like, that's not that important. Like it has its place, but you don't need to do it 7 times. Like this is not a good use of your time. Right.
Right.
And so by identifying all those tasks, you can then say, okay, these are the super high level things that I have to do. Like only I can do these. Like for the show example, I have to be the one sitting here doing the interview. 1, because I love it, and 2, or I guess that's a little confusing. Anyways, 1, because I love it, but 2, like you're not gonna. I mean, I guess you could, but like I don't want to outsource this. Like this is the beauty of it. This is what I love, right? This is where the passion comes from. So there are some things you just can't outsource, but a lot of the things you can. A lot of the things you don't need to be doing. And I loved what you said about when you free yourself up from those things and you give yourself the space, then you can think, then you can plan, then you can learn, you can grow. And it's not that you have to be grinding every single day, like 25 hours of the day, but like if you identify the most important things that you should be doing, and then you do those things really, really well. It's kind of like with our own, the essence of who we are. There's like the essence of who we are. Like there are a few fundamentals that that's you. That's who you are. And I feel this very similar in the business. I think you brought up a lot of great points there.
It's absolutely, absolutely true. I mean, there's so many versions of that advice. people, when they ask me for advice, I mean, yes, I give my clients lots of context specific advice, but my core piece of advice to everyone out there is like, getting good advice is really not that hard, especially if you're willing to pay for it, even a little. It's the following it that's hard. And that piece about figuring out what you need to be doing and what you need to be letting go, that piece of advice is just repeated by everybody I know who is successful. Every book on great business strategy has something about that. And it's simple advice, really, but following it can be so hard. That's the hard part of amazing advice. And it takes, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not integrity, intention, real intention. And don't kid yourself just because it sounds simple that it's going to be easy, except that it's probably going to be hard. But if you're aiming to have both a business that's profitable and a life that you enjoy, whether or not that's a quote lifestyle business or not, you have to follow that piece of advice. Whatever form of it makes sense for you, you have to do that. And you're gonna have to push yourself hard if it feels hard to make that happen for yourself.
I think one of the cool things about this conversation that we've had is that it's almost made a full circle back to what you were saying earlier about getting clarity and being able to focus. Because when you clear out those things that either are not important or you shouldn't be doing them, and you have like these very, specific things that like, okay, I'm going to do these. I'm going to be the best at them. And by the way, those things may be very large and expansive. Like for example, one of the responsibilities that I have is to be on the show and to, like it is my role and my duty to host a good show, right? That's a very specific thing, but that encompasses like a whole humongous realm of possibility and responsibility and things that I have to take ownership of. So I think it's important that's like you can label it as like, okay, these few things, but there's so much more depth to those specific things. And I feel like when you identify that, you can get the clarity of like, okay, these are the things that I need to do. And then you have you can focus in and do those things really, really well. Let's talk about how the clarity that you got as a person really translated into clarity in your business and your nonprofit and all the things that you're doing professionally.
Well, I think there's two sides to clarity. There's what you're going to do, and then there's what you're not going to do. I think Todd Herman, if you follow him in his work, he talks about constraints. And I really believe in the more you give yourself constraints, the things you're not going to do. Sometimes they're the things you are going to do, but there's like, what do you want to accomplish? And then what is the very specific way you're going, the parameters you're going to work within? And I think our initial kind of instinct as humans to be like, I don't want parameters, that's going to make it harder. But that's not how our brains actually work. The more we give ourselves parameters and constraints, the more we become creative and the more we innovate and the more we kind of start to beeline for what we want. So for me, yes, what I knew about myself is what makes life fulfilling for myself. And for me, that was even when I'd worked in nonprofits, I was always like, not just how can we deliver the mission, but how can we systematize to this whole thing so it can be like exponentially more significant. That's how I work. And so I knew that that was the way of the work. But the money piece, run your numbers, people, whether it's your personal numbers, your business numbers, you have to do the math. Our brains are not hardwired. We are not wired to think about things from a numerical data perspective. So it's really important that you get those numbers and you like look at them on paper. For me, I had to add up. I was like, well, how much money do I really need to take out of this business at the end of the day? And I was like, well, I need to get out of debt. I was starting my business over $18,000 in debt, in business debt already, as well as my personal debt. But there was more than that. We had been very poor. So I had no savings for retirement. I was already in my 30s. So I actually calculated, and this might sound overkill, but think about, when do you want to retire? And then if you want to retire at 62, how long do you think you're going to live? Are you going to live to 90? Are you going to live to 100? So take that, how many years? How much money do you want to live on each year? And, yes, there's some extra complications of, you'll probably make some money and invest some money and help that grow. But like, how much do you need to make how much do you need to be putting away each year if you're going to retire? And for myself, like, I'm not a fancy person, but I wanted to send my son to the private school that I went to growing up, which had such a big impact on me. I wanted to be able to send him to summer camp, which I went to, which also had a big impact on me and is way more expensive than it used to be. And just the basics of clothes and food, and maybe taking a vacation now and then. And I added it up, and it was a lot more than I thought. But then I had a number. And from that number of how much I need to take home, I could really calculate, well, how much does the business need to, generate in order for me to take home that much? So I had, the way of the work. And then I had like the dollars of the work, like kind of the minimum dollars that need to generate, which then led to more ways of like, how is this way of work going to be delivered? And then when I added in that time piece, like, I spend X number of hours doing it, which gave me even more parameters. It means I need at least this many other people doing these many other things. And so, the more constraints I added, the more it really opened up answers. It showed me the way forward. And I was actually just giving a talk the other day about the impact method, but kind of in thinking about my own story and where the impact method came from, it's a story about how do we find success? And, you brought this up, kind of coming full circle. To me, success comes from pairing three things together that work synergistically. And one of them is that focus, that clarity. And the more specific it is, the better. And one of them is, I've been calling it intention, but it's basically our fidelity to staying, sticking to the plan or putting in the work, keeping to our focus. And then the third thing is iteration, which means you try something and then you evaluate how well it worked and what you've learned. And then you incorporate that into trying again. And when you do those three things together, you start, because each one helps each other. The more you iterate, the more you gain clarity of focus, the more you learn how to have fidelity, like what things to do. And the more you stick to the things you do, the more you know whether or not your plan was good in the first place. And the more you can do, the faster, the more times you're able to iterate. And the more you're focused, the more you get the better data out of each time you iterate. And so all three of those things, they're each impacting each other. And it's that synergy that can really bring us success.
I love those three things because it's almost like you're setting the target, you're making sure you get there, and then you're evaluating and moving to the next target. Like it's like a growth and adaptation model it's like a positive virtue cycle. I love that. I really do love that. And I think one of the most important things there is to recognize that you're just not going to get it right on the first time, more than likely.
No way. Yeah. And let yourself off the hook. Just try it.
Yeah. I feel like I'm a recovering perfectionist because as I was growing up, like, I hold my family in very high regard. And, my grandpa, he's a judge, and he was a social worker first, and then a lawyer, and then a judge. And he's written articles, he's contributed to the greater body of knowledge in the field of social work. And, he's a professor, and he's done all these things, and literally one of the social work conferences or associations created, and my grandpa's name is Judge Saul Gothard. They literally created the Saul Gothard Lifetime Achievement Award, right? So he's just done so many things, and all of my grandparents have done so many incredible things, and my parents too, and my aunts and uncles as well. So it's like, I always thought like, whoa, these are some enormous shoes that I have to fill. And so I always tried to like be, I tried to be very perfect about everything that I did. And I realized that's just not the way to make the most progress. Like, that is a very inefficient model, because you spend so much time trying to be perfect in this one little thing, when instead you could be trying and failing and learning and getting better and trying again, which is part of the essence of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, absolutely. Trying to be perfect is like a block to moving forward, because you've put an end on progress. When you set some definition of perfect, you've just put an end in it. And the difference between like an iterative mindset and a non-iterative mindset is if you know you're iterating and you're on a journey and you're not worried exactly about where, like, you have your parameters, but you know that where you think you're going is probably going to change. And that's okay. It's just about knowing where you think you're going right now. That when you fail, if you're iterating, failure is a step forward. It is clarity around where not to go, what not to do, what not to try again. It is not in any way an impediment to moving forward. But if you're worried about perfection, not only is perfection going to create an end point, but every failure will feel like an end. And you want to open yourself up to open door, like you said in this video, open doors. We want to always be opening doors. You'll get through your current problems and you'll learn a whole new set of amazing problems to enjoy life experiencing. There's my positive mindset for you coming out. But really, what is, to me, what is life beyond? I mean, people have different beliefs around this, but to me, the joy in life is experiencing its complexities and the simple pleasures as well. I don't think one is better than the other. We get to live life, and that's what we get. So, enjoy the journey, and know that there are many doors, many things you'll never expect that will pop up and completely change you forever.
There's an interesting, I guess it's maybe a theory or I'm not going to try to label it. It's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. And I learned about this specifically from a PhD in biopsychology. I was talking to a gentleman here actually in New Orleans, and he was telling me about this. And it's a cognitive bias where people think they know more about something than they actually do. And he said it, and I just started busting out laughing. It was so funny when he said it, but he said, when people first start out on a track or on a path and they get a little bit of knowledge, they vastly overestimate the size of and significance of that knowledge, and they way oversimplify the subject matter that knowledge is in. And he said, only once they keep learning and keep growing do they realize not only do they really not even know, so infinitesimally small how much they know, but in the greater scheme of things, collectively, as all people, we just barely scratched the surface on information and knowledge and wisdom. And first of all, I thought that was hilarious, because I was like, I've totally been there. I thought I knew it all, and I realized I know nothing. But to your point of when you first start out, you just don't know what you don't know. You don't really know where you're going. You don't really know where you're going to end up, and that's okay. Because how do you expect to get past that if you just try this one thing and you're so, here's a little bit of a paradox. You're so focused on that one thing, and I think the focus is good, but then it's almost like you're too rigid in that focus on that one
it's
thing.
about having the focus, not really where the focus is.
That's
it's not
brilliant.
Really about getting to the end. It's the having the focus that gets you moving. It's not really about where you're going. Doesn't, you need the binoculars, but it doesn't really matter where you point them. Point them anywhere. And if you combine that with iteration, you will start slowly refining where you're pointing them to where you in your heart or your mind or whatever fulfills you, you will refine where you're going, because you don't really know where you're going. This is real life. We are like people, our human brains, we're really not that logical. We're very emotional. Random stuff happens in the world. Like, you don't have to know where you're going. And if you can be okay with that and remember that have focus, but doesn't matter where the focus is, just have the focus and iterate, and you will end up somewhere amazing. I'm sure of it. Like, I know that about iteration and focus. And yes, you have to stick to the plan too. Like, if you keep doing that, it doesn't matter who you are or where you start from or where you thought you were going, really, you will end up somewhere fulfilling and amazing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I would just like to also point out that we are dynamic creatures. And what I mean by that is you have a certain set of beliefs and ideas and, an identity of who you are today that will be vastly different than who you are in 10 years from now. Right. Yeah. And that's okay. And in fact, I think that's a really good thing, because that means that we can grow and learn and get better. Right. But if we as people are all dynamic and constantly changing, and we as people are grouping together to take an organization forward and build a business or build a nonprofit, like by definition, that means that's going to change too. Like, yeah,
absolutely.
We're all dynamic, and everything that we do is dynamic, and it's constantly shifting. But I love what you said about, if you just keep going, you'll kind of hone in over time on like, okay, oh, this is more important to me. Oh, this is really where I want to be. This is where I really want to spend my time. Now, I think the one caveat to that is I'm not sure if it's fair to say it doesn't matter where you're going. I think, and I understand why you said it. I just think it's important to throw in this caveat of, I believe it is very important to have certain parameters, and those parameters, I believe, at least in the beginning, I mean, you should have these parameters forever, but those beginning parameters, the foundation of your parameters, should be your values and your guiding principles.
I completely agree. And the way you get there, and, and I think, just to kind of bring it back, I was struggling for words earlier, but talking about, learning about what's at your core and saying that we're very simple at our cores. There are only a few things that make you you. You're not going to lose them. And you can feel free to open up to all the things that change, that will change. You can, become a different person, but you won't be a different person. You'll still have you at the core. And so you can have so many versions of yourself and still know yourself through that journey. Those two things are not in conflict with each other. And it's because what I think is at our core is really just, it's a few fundamental things. And, it might be like the smell of your family's cooking, and, the way you react when things get hard. It could just be a small handful of things. And you can look forward to knowing all the different versions of yourself, and knowing that if some version happens and you don't like it, that it's probably going to change, or you can change it. Like, you're not stuck with most of what you do in a day and those interactions that you have. You're just stuck with your core, and it's simple, and it's probably beautiful in whoever you are.
Absolutely. I actually want to give an example of that, because as you're saying it, I was like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I saw the examples in my mind. When I was a little kid, so I'm Jewish. When I was a little kid, I went to the Jewish day school in New Orleans. And we always had these kind of like plays, but like almost like little presentations or whatever the right word is. But the kids, we would all learn something and we would act it out, and it'd be this like dramatic scene. And it was so much fun, right? But I loved being in there and being on stage and giving it everything I've got and like belting out the songs. And so that was when I was a little kid, right? But then it evolved to, oh, well, I really like being on stage. I really enjoy performing or creating for other people. And so how that manifested itself when I got a little older, like in high school, was I was in a band. And so, this microphone that I'm actually using, the reason I'm using this particular one is because I was the vocalist in a band in high school, right? And so, and now, of course, we're doing the show. So, and it's still kind of the same, the same idea. And I love to speak on stages and do keynotes and public speaking. And I think to your point, like the fundamental element within me is the same, but how that has been expressed has changed over time. Right. And so it's not like what I was doing that defined me, but it was who I am.
Yeah. The way you respond when you have an audience or when you're in that type of situation. And then there's a whole world full of those types of situations, and you could travel through some of them or all of them, or find one that like you really fall into, like podcasting. You'll have many more journeys of that. It's so true. And to know that, and it's so great to recognize. I hope it feels freeing to know that it's not being the musician that's at your core. It's at that being on stage, and that opens up so many potential doors compared to just that one route of that's free to use being a musician as an example.
Absolutely. So, okay, we talked a lot about travel, and we got a little bit into clarity, and we talked a little bit about nonprofits, but I want to open that door a little bit wider. Why did that call to you so much? Why was that so important for you to be involved in the nonprofit space?
Well, probably a lot of it had to do. So I went to this small elementary school that was started by a friend of mine's mother. I joined in its second year of existence. I'd actually also gone to a preschool that I started in its first year. And then when I left that school, my mother stepped in to help get the school running, keep the school running. And she became head of school for many years. So when I came back and I was offered a job, and so I should preface that my mom, so I guess in this school that I went to, and also the summer camp I went to, there was a lot of messaging around helping people, social justice, not so much in an advocacy way, but like we all play a part in living, being human beings as community. Not any particular like religious faith, but just like as a human being on this earth, I was raised to believe that it is my responsibility, along with everybody else's, to live in community together so that we can all be as happy as and feel as happy as we possibly can. So I had that instilled in me. That's cultural, but the belief was all around me. And so I definitely inherited that. And then my mother, who had, she certainly understood education, but she was not a teacher. She was not a nonprofit administrator. She was someone she's very smart. And when there was no one else to step up and get this school back on its feet, she just said, I will think through these problems and we'll work together, the teachers at the time, to find solutions. And she was willing. And so she stepped up. So when I was given an opportunity to run a conference, I had never run a conference before. I said, I know I can think through these problems and I'm willing to try, because I had seen my mother do that. I had also seen, this other woman who started the school do that. But I'd really seen that with my mother, who took something on and really made it big. So I took on this program. I was good at it. I was great at organizing conferences because of kind of the way my head works. I'm good at planning. And then that one thing led to another. I got offered, to kind of be like office manager. And I discovered in doing the conference that the bookkeeping wasn't being done right. Again, my mother had to, learn business bookkeeping to run the school. And so when I said, do you think I could figure this out? Because the bookkeeper isn't helping me here. And so I took home a copy of, she said, sure, you can think through this, right? That's most of what I do is I say, this isn't quite working right. I can think through this problem. And so, so my mother, it's kind of cliche, but my mother kept telling me, you can think through this, I know you can do it. It's just a matter of tackling it. And usually, yes, I am good at thinking at things. I'm not significantly better than most people, but I'm willing and I have confidence in myself. And so I just sit down and think till I figured it out. And my mother always encouraged that in me. So really, she gave me that confidence. In fact, she just said to me, I think yesterday, I was saying, I've had a very busy 2 weeks. I'm tired, and I don't like her to worry. So I'll be okay. And she's like, I know you'll be okay. She's like, you've been working hard at all the things you've been doing, and she's like, I know you're going to do it. I know you can think through all the problems that are on your plate. And so she's constantly there for me, reminding me of that. She actually had a therapist who told her something that I think is really significant. The therapist said, a human being only needs one person to be their champion in their life and just say, you can do this. I believe in you. All it takes, if you're struggling, is one other person to say that to you. So my mother always said that to me. I certainly have other people in my life who tell me that. And I try, now I'm kind of consciously try to fill my life with people who recognize know a little bit about the things I'm taking on. But, that keeps me going. And that has what kept me going and what allowed me to take on challenge after challenge. Just someone saying, yeah, think through that.
Wow. So it seems like, and I love that the conversation took this direction, but it seems like you really did just figure it out. Like you didn't come into these roles with like previous experience or any insider knowledge or any unfair advantage. Like you just tackled it and figured it out and gave it your best shot, and then because of that and because of that belief, you were able to then take on more and take on more and take on more, and continue to excel over time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, combine that with my positive mindset, even when I'm in a situation where there's a well-established kind of status quo, if it doesn't make sense to me, I just trust that now. When I was younger, I had, kind of like you, I valued my elders and their opinions, and they came before me, and I was like, I'm not seeing this, but I'm going to trust them. And over time, I learned, like, if I'm not seeing it, it's probably not really making sense to other people. But maybe I'm the only one who's brave enough in the room to say, just because you've been doing it this way for 100 years, like, it doesn't make sense. Like, and I think we can figure out a better way. And, I'm ready to be brave. Because I feel so positive, probably. I'm usually the one in the room who says that. But usually I'm not the only one who believes that. I hope that in my life, I inspire other people to say, this doesn't feel right. Maybe we can figure out a better way, regardless of how many people are doing it that way currently or how long it's been done that way. Because the truth is, sometimes the context of our world changes. And so just because something's been done one way for a long time doesn't mean it's the best way to do it now.
That makes me think of something that my grandpa, the judge, always used to tell me. and I don't remember exactly who said it. It may have been R.L. Mencken, but don't quote me on that. But he said, to every problem, human problem, there is a solution. Simple, straightforward, and wrong. and
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I think that is a little humorous, but also pretty profound. Like, there are going to be a lot of big problems, and a lot of them are very structural problems that taken a long time to create them. And it's, people have been doing it a certain way, and there may not be a reason besides that's just always how we've done it. And that has then contributed to the problem. But to be able to come in and say, okay, let's at least start making some sort of change. Let's at least talk about it. Let's dig into, okay, why is this being done? Does it need to be done this way? I think that's a really great first step. My question is, there are a lot of big problems on the planet.
Sure. Yeah.
A lot of big problems in a lot of different ways. And a lot of them are these long-term structural problems that I believe require long-term structural solutions. How did you decide specifically what problems you wanted to tackle?
Oh man, I like solving problems. So, I work with human service nonprofits. I call them all, they all have mission impossibles. Like, how do we make a world where people are all, mentally, where as fulfilled as they can be, as happy as they can be. Problems of homelessness. And I think it's important to see that big picture and have a way to break it down to, what do I need to focus on today? What is the manageable piece? And to me, and so much of this is in the impact method, it's about how, and a lot of it's through writing it down, like, simple solutions. Write it down, people. And we draw a line between the big picture and the step today. Yes, are there steps between? We actually draw it out visually. And so that we can keep those two connected. And then we can just relieve ourselves of worrying about the big picture for a moment, focus on what we're doing today. In the impact method, we work in 2-week sprints and 60-day cycles. So we break 60 days into 4 2-week sprints. And we just say, okay, it's on for 2 weeks. Go, 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 go. How are we looking? We're okay. We're good. Everyone's good. Do we need to change something? Okay, we got our next 2 weeks plan. Look good. Okay, go, 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 go. We do that 4 times, and then we stop. We look at our big picture. We say, what happened in these 60 days? What do we need to bring in for the next 60 days? Is our big goal like exactly the direction we're going? Do we get some more clarity? Can we refine that a little more? Can we tweak that? And then, we go back into it. And so it is that process. If you try to look at a big impossible problem while you're working on the micro steps, you will feel like you are making no change in the world. But if you can allow yourself to kind of, put your blinders on and then look up, and that's the iterative cycle, you will feel better doing it, and you will make more. Everybody, I tell you, will be surprised how much progress you make when you allow yourself to just be free of the big picture distraction and really do those things. It is that fidelity to the plan. Don't just change your plan in the middle because you got nervous for a moment. Just, do it, try it, see what really happens when you do it, and then decide if you need to change.
So let's talk about, and I want to talk about the impact method. And I know you talked about it a little bit, but I really want to drill down into it. But first, I want to talk a little bit more about about the specific problems that you feel very passionate about and that you are addressing, and like, what specific actions are you taking to combat those problems?
Oh man, I like to let my clients choose the problems and play a role in helping them get really clear on that. So maybe one example, if we think about, there are many mental health organizations out there I find joy not in saying because I like one problem more than another, saying, you know, what is unique with your organization? What is the part of this issue that you are really most suited to working on? So for one of my clients, that really became something around access. And it wasn't clear before. They had, in some areas, they're doing advocacy. In some areas, they were making direct service programs. And it's like, what is this this thing that aligns you? And it was really about making access to care more accessible. And then we were able to see what they could get rid of and what they needed to add more of, but also to just know how to then tweak the purpose of everything they did. So if they're making a program, they now know it's because nobody else has this program and it's needed and nobody else is going to make it. So they're going to make a new program, not because their mission is to serve people directly, but it's to provide access. And the only way to do that in that scenario is to actually make the service themselves. In other cases, it might be about finding funding to help people do things. It might be about hand-holding people through what is a complicated process that they have no control over, like getting state support. So, it takes place in many forms, but once we have that focus that we make everything is about access, then we can answer those questions. People ask me and every time I sit down with a client, it's like, I go, oh my God, we'll never figure these things out. But then I tell myself we have a process and the process always works and we will get clarity through that process. And all the kind of things that you don't know, if you're asking yourself questions, if you're like, I don't know what to do, this problem feels too big, more focus, more iteration, more fidelity to the plan. And as you get more of that, you will then have those answers about what to do. That process to succeeding is about figuring out what your next step is. And the reason why it works is because it lays the next step out for you. And the more you do it, the more that next step is a better step towards a better destination. And that's why it works. So, trusting in that process. And I have only a few more minutes. So one more question for me, and I'll have to run so I can be with my little one.
All right. Sounds good. So I want to talk a little bit about connection, because I feel like connection truly is a foundational aspect of humanity. And I'm interested in learning, what is your theory or your philosophy on developing deep, meaningful, and genuine connection with another person?
Oh man. Well, first of all, connection, I think is very related to communication. And I go through life assuming that human communication is very hard, and the norm is that we miscommunicate. And it's only when we try very, very hard and we have some luck working with us that we are actually able to communicate. And I think, so to me, good connection is about good communication, and just assume that the communication is bad and that you've miscommunicated. And I think that creates many opportunities to reconnect or further connect with somebody, because if you feel like you haven't connected and you assume that it's because you miscommunicated, you don't judge them for not connecting back. It's a flawed thing. So, really, really work on communication. And I think the piece about connection is, you said before, like, we are dynamic as people, and recognizing that the nature of connection then is also dynamic, and that people, context is going to change. And, we're full of many decisions. If we're trying to maintain a long-term connection with somebody, we have to be ready to continually reconnect as our context changes. Or we can be okay knowing that we had a connection, it was contextual and it was amazing, and now that the context has changed, we're not connected anymore in that way, and that's okay. It doesn't mean that we are bad people or unable to connect. That is the nature of this world where, in some ways as people, we're just kind of like these particles bouncing into each other. So to me, like that's, it's probably a very like existential theory of connection. But that's how I feel about it. And I think it is beautiful when people connect. It is a worthy, it's a worthy journey to try to connect with people. It is worth, every moment of time and effort. That is part of what our human experience is connecting with people, but to also be ready to accept that a good part of it is just luck and chance, and not to judge ourselves on our connections.
Well, Sarah, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show today. I really do appreciate your time, and I just want to say thank you.
Thank you for having me. This was a great discussion. I feel like I'm going to go back and think a little more about, who am I?
Well, again, thank you so much. And, I wish we had a little bit more time, and there's so many things that we could talk about. So, but again, thank you so much for carving out the time. And to everybody who's watching, listening, I want to thank y'all very, very much. And I recognize that your time is very valuable, and I'm very grateful that you would share that with us. So thank you. I love you very much. And I will see y'all on the next episode. Take care now.